Thank you, Richard, and thank you all for joining us. We're excited to share our work with you. Instead of introducing ourselves, we'll begin by showing you a short clip about how we introduce ourselves to the class.
Hello, and welcome to CS7637, Knowledge-Based Artificial Intelligence / Cognitive Systems. My name is Ashok Goel.
My name is Joyner.
I'm a professor of computer science and cognitive science at Georgia Tech. I've been teaching knowledge-based AI for about 25 years. I've been doing research in this area for about 30. My personal passion is for computational creativity, building AI agents that are human-like and creative in their own right.
I'm a course developer with Udacity, and I'm also finishing up my own PhD dissertation here at Georgia Tech with Ashok as my advisor. My personal passion is for education, and especially for using modern technology to deliver individualized personal educational experiences that would be very difficult in very large classrooms. As we'll see, AI is not just the subject of this course, but it's also a tool that we're using to teach this course.
We have had a lot of fun putting this course together. We hope you enjoy it as well. We think of this course as an experiment as well. We want to understand how students learn in online classrooms. So if you have any feedback, please share it with us.
So we started on this course about almost exactly a year back. And right from the beginning, we had 4 motivations. Of course, we wanted to propagate knowledge-based AI to a larger group of students, but we had 3 others. We wanted to take lessons learned from learning sciences in designing the online course. Many learning scientists have sometimes been concerned that boosters of online learning do not necessarily pay attention to learning sciences. Some of them have been reluctant to take on online learning themselves. Right from the start, we wanted to build on learning sciences. At the same time, we knew there are going to be a large number of open issues. So we wanted to launch a new research program on online learning. Finally, our 4th motivation was, because we work on AI, we are AI researchers as well, we wanted to see whether there were problems for which AI could potentially find solutions. So this is not just a teaching experiment for us. This is the beginning of a research program. If we're going to do research, we must have a methodology. So here are these sort of 3 major core pillars of our research methodology. The first is design-based research. In design-based research, one introduces an educational intervention, then does a lot of observation and formative assessment to see how well the intervention is working. And then, based on that formative assessment, revises the intervention, iterates. So this is an ongoing process. What we are doing this semester is just the first iteration. Next semester, we're going to revise it, and we'll continue. The last element of our design methodology, research methodology is this quasi-experimental study. So even as we are teaching this online course, I'm teaching an in-person course in parallel. And we have deliberately made sure that the structure of the 2 courses is as similar as possible. Same syllabus, same assignments, same take-home exams, same projects, same pace. The question then becomes, what value is online learning adding? How does it compare with in-person learning?
So to understand a little bit about what we're going to talk about the rest of this presentation, I'll give you a few little details about the course. The course is called Knowledge-Based AI with the subtitle Cognitive Systems. It's a 16-week course with about 26 one-hour lessons. Each lesson has an average of 6 interactive exercises in it, and those comprise about 1/4 to 1/3 of the time that students spend on that particular lesson. We have 200 students in the online class and 75 students in the in-person class, and as Ashok mentioned, they complete the identical assessments, identical tests, identical assignments, everything like that. The only difference is that the online students get these video lessons, and the in-person students get traditional lectures. They complete 8 written assignments, 4 projects, and 2 exams, so when we talk about those in a bit, you'll know what those are now. Interaction is handled by Piazza, T-Square, and a peer feedback tool developed by Joe Gonzalez in IC, which we'll talk about a bit in a few minutes. And one of the more interesting things is that grading is blind by the graders. The graders don't know if a particular assignment came from the online class or the in-person class. So we can do some interesting comparisons between the 2 because they're not biased by that knowledge. So as Ashok mentioned, we use quite a few learning strategies in trying to design this course. I've shown 10 of them up here, but we're going to talk about 3 in depth. I'm going to start off by talking about learning by example and learning by doing. So throughout the lessons, as I mentioned before, students have these interactive exercises they're asked to complete. I'll show you the preview for one of them right now.
Okay, now that we have come thus far, let's go one step further. For each of these 2 states, there is only one possible legal and productive move that can follow. What is the legal and productive move from this state? What is the legal and productive move from this state? Can you please fill out these boxes?
Write the number of guards on the left coast in the top left box, just as a number 0, 1, 2, or 3. The number of prisoners. So you don't need to necessarily understand the specifics of how that exercise works, but the interesting thing is that these are interactive exercises embedded directly within the video lessons that students are completing. So after introducing the lesson, we give them this interactive interface. They enter their answer, and they're immediately given some kind of feedback on how accurate their answer is. They might be told that their answer is unreadable, it's invalid, it's inaccurate, it's accurate, it's suboptimal. They get a lot of individual feedback on that. They can then iterate over this and try to improve their answer over time. Each time they submit it, they get a new batch of individual feedback until eventually they arrive at a satisfactory answer. So in order to learn this material, they're really doing it in the context of the lesson with feedback directly targeted to them. Then after they've completed the exercise, we also show a conclusion video where we talk through our own reasoning.
So what answers did you come up with?
So we knew that because the boat is traveling from right back to left, that the boat is going to be on the left in each of the next states. So we didn't even ask for that. In the top state, I won't show the rest of that, but the idea is that not only do they participate in the example themselves, they then get to see how we would complete it. So we talk through our own thought process of how we would complete that particular exercise and compare their thought process to ours and see where the difference is and what they can learn from our approach, or if they even have any advantages over what we did. So like I mentioned, we have 200 students in the class, and when they're watching the lessons, they all come across these exercises. They all enter their responses to these exercises. They get immediate feedback on how accurate or inaccurate they are. They get immediate feedback on what exactly is currently lacking about their answer. They can submit it again immediately, go through this iterative process, and eventually arrive at an understanding. If they get it right the first time, they can move on. If they take half an hour to get it right, they can do that too. There's nothing holding them back or pushing them forward like we would have in a traditional class.
Are you doing this in the regular class as well?
These are not in the regular class because you have to be inside the Udacity interface to be able to do
I know, but are
this.
you doing similar kind of learning by example in the classroom?
So the examples that are used in the online class are used in the in-person class as well, and they're asked to do the same thing. They just lack this kind of feedback mechanism.
The modality of interaction is different, but the examples are the same.
So the nice thing about this is that 200 students, they can all take as long as they want. They can all hurry as fast as they can. They all get feedback individually targeted to their exact wrong answer. We see some really interesting facets from that are difficult to replicate in person. We've gotten, and each one of them is equipped with these nano tutors that I mentioned that are driven to teach them this very, very narrow skill. So we've gotten good feedback on this. 90% of students have told us on a survey that this helped keep them engaged in the lesson. 80% commented that agreed that the feedback that they actually receive in these helps them understand the material better. And in some of our surveys, we've also asked them just to talk about what they like and dislike about the course, and you'll see quotes throughout this presentation in green. And we see them commenting, going out of their way to comment exactly on this, that the way that these exercises are structured helps them understand the material, helps them recognize what their own misconceptions are, and helps them improve over time. So it's been one of the things that I think we've seen some of the best results from in this course.
So David talked about two of the learning strategies, learning by doing and learning by example. I'll talk about the third one, project-based learning. So there is an old test of intelligence called the Raven's test of intelligence. All the projects in the class was based on this Raven's test. This test is of general intelligence, not of specialized intelligence for a particular task. It's perhaps the most commonly used test of intelligence, the most reliable test of intelligence. All projects were based on it. So here is a small test for you. Let's see how you do on it. This is a 2x1 matrix problem. This was the task that the students had to do for project 1. That is, they had to write an AI agent that autonomously will be able to address 40 problems of this kind. The students were given 20 problems they could see in the beginning, and they could design their agent to address those 20 problems. Under the 20 problems, they could not see. So we gave them as test problems. What do you think is the right answer here?
Not there. Yeah.
It will be number 3. That's the right answer. So this is a complicated problem. It just looks easy because one easy solution is to say, well, the inner figure is missing as you go from A to B. So you might say that I'll remove the triangle from C. But then you notice that there is no answer 1 to 6 that has just a square in it. So you have to backtrack. You have to go back and say, perhaps the change from A to B is not that the inner circle is missing, but that the outer circle is missing and the inner circle has expanded. In that case, you might say to go from C to some other choice, I must first remove the outer figure, which is a square, and expand the triangle in between, and that's how you get the answer 3. So this requires a lot of human intelligence, and we have normative data on tests like this, and I can assure you that not all humans get all the problems right either. So this is a challenging thing. For project 2, similar kind of things, but now it's a 2x2 problem. So now you have to worry not only about horizontal analogs, but also about vertical and diagonal analogs. For project 3, it was a 3x3 problem. What do you think is the right answer here? It takes some time to do that. The right answer is number 3. I think I heard that. That's correct. Okay, very good. So the challenge here is to write AI agents that can actually solve problems like this and do well on them. There were 4 projects in all. The first 3 projects I just showed you, 2x1, 2x2, 3x3 matrix. And the 4th one, they had to start working from raw images. So there was image processing was another component in it. So these are challenging assignments. There were also 8 written assignments, and these written assignments were geared towards answering the projects themselves. So this is what would happen. Just before the first project, students would be asked to do 2 written assignments. In these written assignments, they would take some AI concept that they learned in the class and develop that AI concept to address the problem. That will help them design their AI agent for the actual program. Here is some work from the design, from the assignments. I'm not going to go to the detail here. What I can show is that note how they are using certain representations, certain things they have learned from in the AI class to try to write pseudo algorithms, pseudo code to solve the problem. Here is another page from the same assignment. Here are a couple of very quick slides from the design report. So every project was also complete by the requirement of a design report, which were meant to be reflective exercises. So we wanted the students not just to document how their program worked, but to reflect on what worked, why did it work, what did not work, why did it not work. So again, I'm going to go through this very rapidly because showing you the reports here is not the point. The point is that these reports were very extensive and reflective. Let me go to some of the results. Now, I should mention that I have been teaching this class for a long time, and so I have used projects like this in earlier years. Based on that, we had certain expectations of how well students would perform on them. So our expectation was, going into the class, this is what David and I talked about, that perhaps the best students, the best projects will solve about 25 of the 40 problems right. To our great surprise, more than half of the students solved more than 25 problems right. The median itself was 27. So how to interpret these results? Well, one way of interpreting is that it's really engaged and motivated the students. Students personalized it, so what would happen is they would first do these assignments and ask the question, how do I do it? How do I do problem number 22? How do I do problem 23? Write an AI program based on their introspection. Then as they would write an AI program, which may not necessarily work the way they thought they think, then they'll go back and say, okay, now that I've written an AI program, what does it tell me about human cognition, about my own cognition? And because it became personal, it was really engaging and really motivating, and we were surprised by how good the performance was. We were not expecting this. A little bit more about another learning strategy, very briefly. We also wanted to create a community of practice where students were learning from each other. So after every assignment, we would post data like this. On the horizontal axis are all the problems, and on the vertical axis are how many students or how many projects got a problem right. What we found was, as a result of posting this, students were talking with each other and saying, hey, I didn't get problem number 22 right. Did you get it right? Tell me, how did you get it right? And that created a community of learning where there was a lot of peer-to-peer interaction. On the Piazza forum for the online class, there are some 6,000 messages that have been posted. But it's not just the number of messages, it's the quality of messages, the quality of interaction going on there, and it's really very high quality. To summarize then this part about project-based learning, in this particular course, the projects were based partly on the research we do in our lab, based on a lot of experience that we had with it, and the projects really engaged and motivated the students. So we have now covered some of the learning strategies, but we had a lot more that we tried in the class. We will not go through all of them. Here is a list of the 10 prominent ones that we took from learning sciences. There is a vast literature on all of them in the learning sciences. But of course, there are a large number of open issues as well for which we did not have the answers. So learning sciences does not immediately provide an answer. So that completes the first part of our presentation, which was about the teaching experiment. Now I'm going to shift to the second part. We are going to talk about a beginning of a research agenda. So once again, we had 3 methods in our methodology: design-based research, formative experiment, quasi-experimental study. And we'll begin with the third part, the quasi-experimental study. How did the online students do compared to the students in the in-person class?
So in order to really kind of address this quasi-experimental study, the first thing we really need to do is understand what were the differences between our online and our in-person students coming in. So we sent them all a survey, asked them about themselves, and what we found were not unexpected, but also interesting. We found that the online students had, on average, twice as much programming experience as the in-person students. They were about 10 years older. And they also, unlike many of our in-person students who, for them, the master's is their full-time job right now, the online students are juggling jobs and families, and they have many other obligations that interfere with their work in the class. Interestingly, we also found that the online students tended to be more Americans were in the online class, whereas our in-person class tends to be very, very international. So as I mentioned before, we had blind grading throughout this process so we could do some comparison between our online and in-person students. And what we found was that throughout the early part of the semester and the data that we have so far, our online students actually outperformed our in-person students with statistical significance on 4 of the 8 assignments and 2 of the 3 projects. And we're still doing some analysis to find the nature of that performance and what can be attributed to demographic differences and what might be able to be attributed to differences in the actual course itself. We also surveyed them about their perceptions of the course, and one of the questions we asked was that they compare this course to other OMS courses, non-OMS online courses, and other courses they've taken in the rest of their academic career. And what was particularly interesting about this is that when rating these, they rated it more highly compared to the general college courses they've taken in their academic career than specifically other OMS courses, which suggests a very positive impression of the OMS compared to the academics they've had in the past, which was interesting.
So this particular teaching experiment has led to several new lines of research, some of which are in collaboration with our colleagues. So I'll briefly mention 4 of them. The first one is with my IC colleague, Amy Bruckman, and a PhD student, Joe Gonzalez. I thought I saw Joe here earlier. There is Joe. Okay. So the question in this particular research collaboration is, how do we ensure effective peer-to-peer feedback? I'm not going to the details, but I will mention that we are using one of the tools that Joe has built, which is a really nice tool for facilitating peer-to-peer feedback. And if you're thinking of doing an OMS course, you might want to take a look at Joe's course.
Or in-person course, too. It works great for that course as well.
Second question that we are exploring with Chao Hua Au and Daniel Haynes, who are right here. They come from the Center for Enhancement of Teaching and Learning. So the question that they are really interested in exploring is, how effective are the videos in terms of promoting learning? And there are hard questions here. How do you measure effectiveness of learning? And how do you analyze the video watching habits of various students and then correlate them with how effective the learning was? A third project is with Vishali Moghe and Sandy Flynn from the Georgia Tech Professional Education. They are interested in a very different question. Remember, we are doing these 2 courses in parallel. So they want to see what are the differences in the instructional styles and strategies in the 2 classes. And whether those differences make any difference relative to the effectiveness of learning. So some interactions go on in the in-person class that do not get replicated in the online class. But are those interactions really important in terms of promoting learning? If they are not, then perhaps it doesn't matter whether we have them in in-person class or don't have them in in-person class. And the 4th project is in collaboration with Wendy Newstetter from the College of Engineering. She has been very impressed by the quality of discourse in the Piazza Forum. And the quality of discourse in the Piazza Forum for the online students and the in-person students, there is a huge difference. So the question now becomes, can we say something about how students in the online classes spontaneously start collaborating and talking with each other, something that is not available to them to the same degree as in-person students have, because in-person students can meet physically. So Piazza Forum is the sort of virtual counterpart for the physical meeting, and can we say something about the collaborative nature of those discourses that are occurring in the Piazza Forum? Okay, so the final part of the presentation is about some design guidelines. There are some things that we have learned. I should say that the course is not yet over. The final examination is yet to come, and our students may, and we might change our opinion about the course once the final examination is done. But these are the kind of lessons we have learned from doing the course so far. So here is the first design guideline. And that is that preparing such a course takes an enormous amount of time, and not just time, but energy and effort and thought. So between the two of us, David must have put in about 800 hours. These are estimates. Just in preparation of the course, I must have put in about 250 hours. So we're talking about more than 1,000 hours. But it is not just enough to prepare a course. Something, an important lesson that we learned that I don't think either one of us had appreciated fully before we did this particular experiment is that the delivery of the online learning is as important. And somehow we are putting a lot of resources in the preparation and perhaps not enough in the delivery part of it. So in the delivery part of it, David has been spending about 20 hours per week. The graders have been spending about 90 to 100 hours. I have been spending some time. Put all together, it's 120 hours of work per week. Again, that's a lot of work. If you think of a 16-week semester, we are talking here about a significant chunk of time.
If you double the number of students, what would happen to the number of hours?
That's a good point. So a lot of time, a lot of David's time is being spent on attending to the questions that the students are raising in the Piazza Forum. If the number of questions or discussions scale linearly with the number of students, then David's time would double as well. A lot of my time is being spent not only answering questions at the Piazza Forum and participating in the discussion, not just answering questions, but the discussions are so fascinating, I can't prevent myself from participating in them, and you know, you have to dig into them because I'm learning. So then my time would double probably also. So I don't think this scales well in the sense that if you double the number of size, this will be a logarithmic function. My suspicion is it will be linear. The final slide on this particular part, and that is that you really want to give lots of rubrics for assessment which are really good for both students and for the graders. Sorry? So often we just give assignments, but without informing students what is expected of them. But telling them up front what is expected of them, and then letting them free, letting them do whatever they go further than what we expect is a good way of doing things. Another aspect of this is to give feedback early and often. This is sort of counterpart of fail early and often that is in HCI. Here is give feedback early and often. Becky.
Given that these are students in the OMS, that they are professionals, they've already taken degrees, the fact that they need this, the fact that there is lots of hours in these, so do you feel you have things to say about what would happen if you were doing a MOOC where the students weren't curated? Would all the time estimates just go up?
I do not know the answer to the question. So what happens if there was MOOC in Joyner and not the OMS students? OMS students are definitely a self-selected group. So that makes both things easier in a way and things harder in a way. It's easier because they're really motivated, engaged, smart professionals, and it's harder because they do such good stuff that it ends up taking a lot of your time and energy.
So you might notice that, I'm sorry, were you done with?
Yes.
Okay. So you might notice that this feedback right here is feedback that's generally good for any class. You want to do this whether you're doing online or in person. But it takes on a special importance, in my opinion, in online classes. And the reason is that there are phenomena that occur in our in-person classes that we often take for granted, that we just assume them. Online, those things don't necessarily automatically recreate themselves. So for example, in an in-person class, we have a very natural classroom routine. You come to class 2 or 3 times a week. You know that I'm going to say at the end of class, don't forget the assignment is due this Saturday. I'm going to say, don't forget we have a test on Monday. We create kind of this natural routine or rhythm of seeing each other. In an online class, you've developed all the lessons in advance. You can post them online and you can disappear. Don't do that. What we find is students have this feeling of isolation, oftentimes online, which is natural because they're not seeing us face to face, they're not seeing their other students. And we need to deliberately do things that break this feeling of isolation. So one of them is to create a classroom routine. Every Monday morning, I post a list of announcements. Every Friday afternoon, I post a list of announcements that's just, hey, here's what you need to think about for this class this week. Hey, here's a reminder of what we did during this week. In person, we have this kind of naturally, but we need to do this deliberately online. Another way is interaction with instructors. In person, we have office hours and things like that, and we do that online as well, but there's more interaction that happens kind of naturally in person, that students raise their hand and ask questions during a lecture. They stay after class, they come a little bit early, they chat about things, they talk to their classmates or the TA. And online, there's not naturally this affordance for this, so we need to create a lot of interaction for it that often can be underappreciated because it feels like we're doing something different. It feels like I'm going to the Piazza Forum for the online class a lot more often than I do for in-person. But in reality, it's because it replaces something that's there for in-person that isn't automatically there for online.
I've not used Piazza, but can you actually stop the video lecture, ask a question, and get an answer before you continue the video, like you would do in a classroom?
So what we've seen is that students have asked questions about these video lessons and get responses relatively quick, but not immediate. But I will say other OMS classes have tried to replicate that. So the algorithms class, I believe, has moderated watching lessons. So the instructor will sit there with the students in office hours, they'll all watch it together, and a student can virtually raise their hand and say, hey, I have a question about this. So that does exist in some OMS classes. Breaks a little bit the idea that students can watch at their own pace and skip around and rewatch things, but they still have that opportunity. They can watch the moderated lesson and they can back later and watch it again. So we see some attempt to replicate that. The other thing is, this is, I think, similar to what you're talking about, this idea of live interaction, not posting on Piazza and waiting an hour or a day for a student or a TA to respond to your post, but actually being able to talk back and forth. We see office hours in many classes are either pre-submitted questions or things like that, but in our class we've tried to create this live interaction of students can just drop by and chat. And one student at least has commented that this was the #1 thing that made his past OMS classes feel different than in-person classes, is he couldn't just talk to anybody live. And this allowed him to do that. So it's important to create this kind of live interaction. So these are things that allow us to deliberately recreate things that happen fairly naturally in person. But there's another side to that coin. There's also the notion that there are things we can do online that are difficult to do in person. And it's important to leverage those advantages in order to make up for the things that we can do in person that we still have difficulty doing online. We've had some students even comment that based on some of the things we've done, they prefer this experience to the traditional experience because of some of the things they can do with the material they get in this class. So one of the ways that I've already talked about a little bit when I was talking about learning by doing and learning by example is this idea of individualized feedback that can arrive immediately, the ability to iterate over an interactive exercise until you've mastered it, until you've gotten the right answer. And the ability to take as much time as you need for it instead of being pushed along by the rest of your class or held back by students who are still a little bit confused about it. A similar idea to this is the idea of long-term and parallel discussions. So what we've noticed in the Piazza Forum is that we have discussions that have been going on for 5 or 6 weeks. We have discussions that are of very, very different levels of abstraction, very, very different levels of complexity. We have students asking, how does this agent actually relate to human intelligence? And we have students asking, how do I access an instance variable in Python? We have very, very different levels. And in person, when we do a class discussion, we have to take turns talking. We have to time box it. It's over when the class is over. And we have some constraints on there that online we don't really see. We see discussions that can develop over a very, very long term. They can develop as the term goes on. And different students can kind of self-select and group around the discussion that's most appealing to them instead of everyone having to sit through the same lesson even if half the students are completely toned out. And the other thing we've noticed, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, is that online we have the ability to provide the materials necessary for students to really go at their own pace. Part of this is a great pedagogical technique that students can hurry through the materials. They're very interested and very engaged. They can take their time if they're getting a little bit confused. It's also very respectful to our online students who have the specific constraints I mentioned earlier. We had one student, for example, who said, I'm in the Indian Navy. I'm going to be on a boat. Can I download the lesson videos and complete the assignments in advance? Online, we can do that. In person, you're going to be gone for a week. You're going to miss 3 lectures. There's not much we can do about that. You can watch the video, but most of our in-person lessons or lectures aren't currently videotaped. So we can provide some affordances for a lot of self-guiding and self-pacing of material that are difficult to do in person, which can help make up for some of the things we lose in that translation to online learning.
So fourth design guideline pertains to the nature of the projects in the OMS classes. Almost all OMS classes have projects, but what makes a good project? We were really struck both by the performance of the students on these projects, but even more than just performance, students have come up with really creative techniques to solve the kind of problems I was showing you. These techniques range from game theory to Monte Carlo simulations, and because I do research in this area, I can tell you that some of these techniques have never been described in the research. So these are potentially really good research papers these students could be writing. At least half a dozen of them have expressed an interest in writing papers, so this could really lead to a bunch of papers.
Half a dozen of them.
Half a dozen, right.
Sorry, not half the students.
So one of the guidelines for doing these projects, why did these projects work? I think there are several reasons. One is that we use these projects as a foundation throughout the course. So often there are projects in these OMS courses, in some of the OMS courses, but they are not directly related to the content of the course. They run in parallel, but there's no bridging between them. But in our case, we geared the entire class and many of the class discussions with these projects, and that really laid a foundation in both directions. Another aspect of this was that these projects were open-ended. We did not tell them what technique to use. We let the students run with the techniques that they wanted to run. They were very creative. These projects really admit to a lot of creativity, yet they were very personalizable. Students could really identify with them. They could really relate with them. This was an experience for them where they could, perhaps for the first time for many of them, look into their own cognition and say, well, gee, how does my mind work? And finally, the last idea here is that these projects need to have measurable outcomes. So often the projects are there, but you don't know how well your program is doing almost until the end. But here, with each project, a student could see his or her progress. And today, my program is solving 12 out of 40 problems. Tomorrow, I'll solve 15. I'm making progress towards it. And that sort of notion of measurable progress, of measurable outcome, we think was very important. So these are 4 of the guidelines. We have, so for right now, 10 guidelines. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we are trying to write papers on this, so we're going to try to document all of this. But there are clearly many more guidelines. We're still reflecting on the process. And that brings us to the last part about our reflections.
So we wanted to just close the presentation just by sharing some of our personal, not data-based reflections, just on the experience of teaching the course, because it's a very personal activity that if you decide to do an OMS course or TA an OMS course, it's something that is going to take up a lot of your time, and you want to make sure you're getting something out of it too. So my #1 takeaway from developing this course and TAing this course has been that the students in the OMS are absolutely incredible. They are some of the most engaged, motivated people I've ever worked with in any context. They maintain their own discussions, they spin off their own debates, they interact with each other and with us without having to be prodded or poked or, coaxed into it. We offer no incentive for discussing things on the forum, and yet we see a whole lot of interaction on it. They come from a really, really wide selection of backgrounds, which is really powerful because it's helped the learning in the class. I would not hesitate to say they've learned more from each other than they've learned from us, and I think I may have learned more from them than they've learned from me. Because they come from such diverse backgrounds, they can bring in things like, in my industry, which is healthcare, we're using a technique similar to this to do X, Y, and Z, and here's how this is going to help us going forward. We see a lot of that interaction on the forum of people commenting about how it's going to impact their job. But even more interestingly, we see a lot of interaction with people talking about how they're just reflecting on this material in everyday life. They come by to say, a lot of the OMS students in our class actually have kids, and they've commented that this has changed the way they look at the way their kids think. And they've come back to the forum to say, my kid was doing this the other day, and I realized this is similar to this, and this is what they're going through right now. And there's no reason for them to be doing that except for they want to interact. And interacting with them has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. I'll close with 2 anecdotes on that. One is that, so as Ashok mentioned, or as we talked about, our project is developing an agent that solves the human intelligence test, and the idea being, when can we know that we've developed an agent that is as intelligent as a human being? And we, after each project, we post the exemplary projects. The students can look at the best projects and see how the best projects differed from their own personal project. And we had a student who posted saying, I'm a little skeptical of the best projects that we posted because they're all very, very complicated. They're all very, very rule-based. Can we really describe intelligence just as a set of rules? And on my agent, for example, it doesn't perform as well, but it's very simple. It spawned a discussion with 40 students generating over 10,000 words of discussion posts about what this tells us about intelligence, what this tells us about the way people think, what our standard for assessing intelligence in an AI agent should be. None of it was spawned by us. I just signed on one day and suddenly there was this massive discussion going on. And they really engaged very deeply with it without any reason to do so except for they felt personally driven to engage with it. And the other anecdote is that one of our students, our graders recently, had a tragedy in his personal life and is in the hospital. And the outreach from our online students has been incredible. They've sent him cards, they've sent him emails. One of them even sent him flowers in the hospital for someone whose name they had never even heard until a couple days ago. So the engagement, the ownership, I guess is the best word for this. The ownership they take over the success of this class and this program has been downright inspiring to me. They're not passive consumers of what we pour out onto them. They want to dig in, they want to take control of it, and they want to help both themselves, their fellow students, and the program as a whole succeed. And it's been incredibly rewarding. I would highly recommend it to anybody simply because it's a joy to work with the student body.
Let me reinforce a couple of things that David said. First, for me too, I've been teaching for 25 years. This is the best group of students I've ever encountered. Second, in terms of interaction in the in-person class, I'm doing that in parallel. Getting any interaction is a struggle. In the online class, it's never a problem. Students just jump up and down and they interact and they ask interesting questions. A few other thoughts, my own reflections. This has been a really interesting experiment. I don't know how much my students have learned, but I can share that I have learned a lot. I did not fully appreciate how much learning sciences has to contribute to online learning. I think we have an artificial separation between them, but it's time that online learning people and learning sciences people get together. It's just not happening, it needs to happen. Another reflection is that I put in about more than 400 hours of time this year, which means that I could not put that time in something else, writing papers or writing proposals. And so the question for me as a faculty member, is it worth it? Should I have done something different with my time and my energy? That's a sort of a hard question to answer. The honest answer is that if all these 400 hours are only for teaching this 200 students or so, then probably not. On the other hand, if this leads to the beginning of a research program, then definitely yes. So if it leads to proposals of the kind that we are thinking of writing with Chahua and Daniel, if it leads to papers, then this is very exciting. It's the beginning of a journey. Some people, David included, have compared online learning and in-person learning to making a movie versus doing a play. So you can think in terms of an online course, you're doing it for masses, but it's a cold medium. In play, there's much more of an emotional intimacy when you're in a theater. So there is a stronger emotional contact. You can make eye contact. You can talk to people. They're physical beings. If we take that particular metaphor closely, then I have to say that as a teacher, despite all the problems with in-person learning, in some sense that is emotionally more satisfying. Because at the end of the day, I can see students smiling sometimes. It's hard to get students to smile in the in-person class, but there is a connection. They come and talk to me after the class is over, and that's much more emotionally satisfying. On the other hand, if I look at it not from an emotional perspective, but from an intellectual perspective, which is what we are researchers, as teachers and researchers, then the online experience has been intellectually extremely enlightening. I have come across issues that I would have never thought had I not done this particular course, and I'm really so glad that I did it, and I would recommend it to anyone. So we deliberately kept this particular presentation short because we wanted time for discussion. But before we end it, these are some acknowledgments. We owe a lot to a number of people, to all the teaching team, the graders, and the TAs for this particular course, to the Georgia Tech OMS team, especially David White, and to the Udacity Georgia Tech team, including Jason Barros, who is here right now from Udacity, and Aaron Gross, who was our main video editor.
Mm-hmm, yeah, a special thanks to Aaron Gross for making us actually look halfway presentable. So
that's it. Thank you.
First, I got to congratulate you and say how impressed I am with the thoroughness of the course development and all the uses of learning science, what we understand, and also the clear, very strong commitment that we both have to making it a success. Have you considered, now that you have this material for the on-campus course, getting rid of lectures, just have the students go through the material and have, let's say, a once-a-week presentation section when students come together and talk about things rather than lecturing?
That's a very good question. So we are taking this design-based research approach to this. We have conducted the first iteration. Now we really need to reflect on it and see how we can do the second iteration better. So the next time I'll be teaching the in-person course will be in fall 2015. And at that particular point, I would like to incrementally introduce some of these videos as part of the in-person course. But again, there are a number of issues there. It's not enough to just introduce the videos that students can watch either at their leisure time or, as is happening in some classes right now, to watch as part of the classroom time itself. How do we divide the student exercise? How do we divide this classroom time between video watching and discussions and group exercises? All of those are open questions, but certainly we want to move in that direction.
I think just to piggyback on that, I think one thing we ultimately want to do is we want to understand, in theory, there are things that students get out of the in-person course that they probably don't get out of the online course. We'd like to think that there are things that they can get out of the online course that they don't get from the in-person course. We've seen some superior performance by online students, but with the demographic differences, it's really hard to attribute that to the course as opposed to the student. They're more experienced, of course they're doing better. And so one thing we'd like to do in the long run or at least I'd like to do in the long run, is actually identify what are the things that you get from an online class that you don't get from an in-person class. If we have a shared student body, similar demographics, can we actually start to look at what do you get out of it? Does it change your enjoyment? Does it change your understanding? Does it change anything like that? So.
I got it.
Well, actually, what I was going to say links what Jim was asking, given this kind of compound of kind of difference in the student motivation and skills, research this is kind of hard to do a lot, but it's so interesting to essentially drop the two sections on campus, one that is in person, and one that is purely sort of on format. But at least you have the same student body. Then you kind of look at when you remove that and sort of the difference in motivation and skills and age and all of that, you sort of narrow down on how much of it is.
No, I really like what you're suggesting, because how do we take this research methodology further, and that creates another kind of controlled experiment between a control group and experimental group. I think that's the right kind of thing to do.
The compound there is you cannot control the brick and mortar class in that example from seeing the videos.
Yes.
You cannot. So no, you can't, because they can know someone in the other class and they can watch it.
Well, you could wall them off, but it's
No,
not.
they can go to their room and watch it. You can't prevent it.
You can't control who's on the
Yeah.
costume.
Yes.
I'm assuming the forum was open to the classroom students also.
No, the online forum was not open to the in-person students. So the in-person class interactions are going pretty much the way they went last year. So it's the same discussion style. I think we have tried to do in the in-person class, mimicking some of the things in the online class, quite a few exercises. So in almost every class, we might do 1 or 2 exercises where students work in small teams. So it's not just lecture oriented, but they do not have access to the videos.
I was curious, if it were open, would you see an improvement in the performance of classroom students based on those discussions going on the online forum?
That's a good question. Another open question. So many interesting questions to answer, right? So what exactly does lead to effective learning? So here is one thing that has happened. Some of the graders have access to the Piazza discussions in the online class, although they are taking the in-person class, because we had to get graders from somewhere. And they have been very, very enthused and enthusiastic about the discussions going on in Piazza. It's been illuminating and eye-opening for them. So there will be a crossover effect, but we haven't yet studied it. Great question.
And sorry, just to finish that off real quick, I know one class has tried that with not great results. But I think there's a question of not just whether to do it, but how to do it well. So.
Becky, Kelly, then we'll go to the people.
So a lot of these questions that you've been exploring today are sort of content neutral, right? And you said a really interesting thing, that one of the reasons that motivates you to do this is because you can see these kinds of research questions. But once they are answered, I was sort of starting to think, do you have any sense of whether there are more content-specific questions? Because otherwise, the MOOC research agenda is actually quite small. If it's mostly content-free questions.
That's another great question. So, for example, consider a course on algorithms that is being taught. Will these same kind of techniques also work for algorithms? Probably not all of them, because for one thing, the algorithms course does not have a project of the kind that we are talking about. So that learning strategy goes away entirely. Also, at least in some of the courses, the Piazza discussions have really focused on homework-related issues, like the algorithms thing. How do you generate the kind of captivating discussion that we are having in our class? Is that captivating discussion partly of this result of the subject matter, which happens to be AI and cognitive systems, and we're all sort of interested in that kind of thing? I don't know. So unfortunately, for too many questions that are being raised here, my answer is I don't know. That's just the way it is. Kelly, I'll then come to you.
A fair amount of the feedback that you showed from student quotes and things related to course structure and the amount of time they put into organization and whatnot. Did you receive the same type of feedback from your in-class students, and were they satisfied with the course, just with the preparation and whatnot?
So we sent out a survey to in-person students, just like to online students, and they responded to the Likert scale questions. They wrote almost nothing. So no, we don't have very strong quotes from them, because about half as many filled out the surveys that we sent out, and those who didn't write very much.
So it's hard to express, but there really is a qualitative difference in the interaction with the online students and the in-person. So I'll go back to David's anecdote about a grader who got hurt very badly in an assault recently. I posted that information, exactly the same message, to both the in-person Piazza forum and the online Piazza forum. There was not a single response in the in-person Piazza forum. On the online Piazza forum, there is an outpouring for support. People are sending messages, e-cards, buying flowers. They're saying things like, we are part of a family, how can we help? It's just a big difference.
I think that the other thing about that is that the feedback that we've gotten from the online students, it's targeted differently. It's geared towards, I have the opportunity to improve this class either for ourselves, because we sent out surveys early in the semester, or for the next batch. And you see a lot of very critical analysis, not critical in the negative sense, but very insightful and detailed analysis. We had students write 600-700 words on what they're enjoying and what they're disliking and how it can be improved. And I think that speaks mostly to the ownership they have over the program, that I'm not just coming to Georgia Tech, sitting in classrooms for 2 years, filling out assignments and getting my degree. I'm part of this program, and it's a program that I will help sculpt and improve, and I'm going to be what tells the world this is a good program, and this program will in turn reflect well on me. So,
yes.
So a lot of this seems to be coming from the fact that this online collection of 200 students is just a really good set of students. I'm curious a couple things about that. One, you say kind of they're active and they participate, you end up with these like 10,000 word like kind of forum discussions. But is it all 200 participants, or is it like there are 20 people that are really into it and there are 180 people that are, you know, exactly like the 70 people you have in the in-person one? Combined with that, these are early adopters of the first group. Like we've got, this is the first time we're teaching this course, this is only the second year we've been doing this online master's program. How much of this is really, these are the people that have really wanted to do this for ages, and 10 years from now, it's going to be exactly like the in-person one, where everyone's just sitting there and it's just kind of, this is how this works. And then, I guess a third, completely unrelated point is that with like the in-person one, I mean, I'm in the 6505 class this semester, is being taught by Charlotte Brubaker, and it's being run as like kind of the videos for both the online students and the in-person students. Whereas the in-person students also get kind of some activity sessions, combined with just the benefits of having everyone you're taking the class with be there. And so like I do study groups with people I know in class, which is something that is harder to do in an online case. So how is, like, so is partially some of that kind of lack of energy you're seeing in the in-person one, is that just because that energy is being applied to things like study groups, and rather than being kind of in this Piazza environment. Like I haven't hosted Piazza, but I've had a study group for all 8 programs. So, yeah.
All 3 of those are really good questions. 2 of them are harder than the 3rd one, so that I'll leave to David. So I'll answer the 3rd one, which I think is I can handle more easily. I'm sure that it is the lack of an equally energetic discussion in the Piazza Forum for the in-person class is partly because they don't need to contribute as much to the Piazza Forum. They meet one-on-one. But our observations are based not just on the discussions on the Piazza Forum. They're sort of based on overall interaction in the class. Okay. I'll add one more thing before I hand it over to David. There are also gender issues here. So we were early on sensitized to the fact that in the online classes, women students tend to participate a lot less. And that is in part true because the number of women students in the online class is a lot less than the number of women students in the in-person class. However, an interesting observation in the online Piazza Forum is that the women students are really participating vigorously as well. So although the numbers are small, their participation is no less than that of the male counterparts, which is a good observation to have.
And to piggyback on that as well, yeah, I've used the metaphor in the past that, and it speaks to your 3rd point, that in person we have a classroom and then we also have Piazza. Online, Piazza is the classroom. It's the only place where you have the interactions you usually have in the classroom. And that has a helpful effect that because it's all happening on Piazza in the first place, we can have some of these long discussions, these parallel discussions that we don't see in person. There's no reason why we couldn't have those in person, technically. I speculate at least the reason why we don't see them as often is because I'm already participating in class discussions 3 times a week. Why would I bother wasting my free time to do it on Piazza? But because it's all on Piazza, we see these other effects. To your other 2 points, I honestly haven't looked at the interactions data since about 2/3 of the way through the semester, so this may have changed in the past 4 weeks. But as of that point, we saw a pretty typical bell curve as far as student participation. We saw that there are the students who participate in every single thread. There are the students who sign on to Piazza maybe once a month. But what we generally see is that on average, students participate or visit every day and post about 1 or 2 times a week. So we see pretty consistent activity across the board. So.
You have had a question for a while.
I'm sorry, and your second thing was future students, no idea. Okay. So.
Yeah, you mentioned that collaborative learning and the community of practice model was a large part of the learning strategies that you were using. Can you speak to the peer feedback tool that you're using and how that offers improvement to an issue that has come up with Coursera and other MOOCs at using some more expert students to give feedback to non-expert students, and what kind of calibration, if any, is needed?
There have been several interesting observations on that peer-to-peer feedback. First, just one observation about how we did it. So let us suppose that you, David, and I were part of a team, and you provided feedback to David on assignment number 1, and you gave him 5 out of 5, and you provided feedback to me, and you gave me 4 out of 5. Well, you will get 2 extra points because you provided the feedback. But David and I will not lose any points because you provided me with a lower feedback. And that empowered students because they were more willing to give frank feedback if they thought that their feedback will not hurt their peers' grades. So that was observation number 1.
And just to piggyback on that, as a result, we saw peer feedback, so peers grade their peers on the same rubric as our graders. And peers reliably gave their peers lower grades than our graders did. So.
The peer feedback worked very well in the early part of the course. I think much better in the early part of the course than in the second half of the course. Because in the early part of the course, they were really paying attention and learning from each other. But after a while, I think there is a ceiling effect on the quality of the assignments. There is only that many number of hours you can put in, and all the assignments rose in quality, and they sort of pretty much remained there, and the peer feedback did not have as much of an impact as it was having in the beginning.
And just to babble real quick, I think the usefulness of the peer feedback activity is not just in the feedback that you get. The activity itself is the most useful part, that it puts you in the position of, now I'm critiquing somebody else instead of just doing it myself. That puts me in the role of a teacher. This is also a very authentic exercise. This is what these students are going to do when, well, I guess they already have jobs, but it's learning how to give and receive feedback on a team is exactly what they'll do out in the real world. And I think the most critical thing is that we've gotten the most positive feedback from students saying, even if you take out the feedback, being able to see my classmates' assignments is enormously powerful. So.
Let's shift to the sort of right wing of the Senate here. Michael, and then I'll come to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was really impressed. I have one question, one comment. The question is, did you grade the reflective reports as well, and how did you do it? And the comment is basically in continuation what my predecessor said. You know, I mean, the entire MOOC idea is embedded socially in the idea of access to education. Now, I think we should be worried about the fact that the group of students that is kind of signing up for that is really self-selective, because we might up with a situation where we decrease the price of education for those who don't need it, and for those who really need a kind of access to education, they are excluded by the methods we are offering. So that's kind of my comment, and that so it raises on the one hand an issue of justice, but it would also be kind of, or is meant to be an incentive to think about the question, what would it mean to design such a course for students who do not belong to this kind of self-selective group? And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, they're both very, very interesting questions. Let me deal with the first one, and then second one I'll hand over to David, as always. But in the first part of the question, the way we graded the reflective part of the projects was that we assigned a significant weight to the reflective part. It was not so much the grading that helped, as much as we would always pick the 5, 6 best projects, 5, 6 best assignments, seek students' approval to post them in a public place, and then that's when the discussion would begin, the reflection would begin. Students would talk to each other, they will learn from their peers' exercises and projects, and very soon all the projects and reflection exercises started reaching a much higher plateau. So the reflection was happening much more in a collaborative sense rather than us as graders doing the reflection.
But the grading was done by hand, so you didn't use any...
Yeah, it was definitely done by hand. It was not automatic grading. So the only time automatic grading played an important role was in grading the program code because of the nature of the problems that we gave them. Just to go to the second part of your question, I don't know the answer. Can some of these guidelines and strategies be taken for a MOOC in general? I think all of those are really hard, both theoretical and empirical issues.
I think that, and we asked our students at the beginning of the semester, why are you in this class? You know, why the heck are you here? And we saw lots of comments, but the most prominent ones were on flexibility and accessibility, not on cost. And so some students commented on, you know, for the price, how can I not do this? But the more powerful trends were, I have a job, I have a family, I can't take 2 years off to get a master's. This lets me do it flexibly. The cost wasn't as much of a thing that brought up. And I think that's partially because of the level of this. So we're working at the, the graduate school level, that students are going to be very self-selected for the level of material you're working with. What I'm hoping to see is that this is kind of the first step towards opening up earlier education to the masses as well. So I think that if we could provide, for example, I'm not going to propose anything right now, but if there was a Georgia Tech online undergrad, for example, that starts to get to be exactly that kind of thing, that you don't have to have these very comprehensive qualifications before ever even applying to the program. So.
Just about out of time, so one more quick.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry, I was just curious about what your estimate would be for how your hours for your in-person class compared to the number of hours that you showed for the online classwork.
That's a good question. There, I think I can give a more definitive answer. For the in-person class, on average, I'm spending perhaps about 12 hours a week, whereas for the online class, I'm spending about 10. In terms of the graders' work, it's mostly about the same. It just depends on if you scale it up to the number of students, it scales very, very well.
I can say as a TA who TA'd in person and online as well, that online is more work there. But I think that we see the trade-off of you've done the lectures already, so that time drops off, and you make up for it with this other time. If it's a time investment such that the advanced time doesn't save you any time going forward, it's not a great investment. But I think we see exactly that the time you spend doing things in person that aren't lecturing doesn't really change. But the time you spend lecturing changes. So we're kind of taking a certain portion, doing it in advance, and reusing it. So, and we see, I think, a slight bump in the time commitments for other things. But
can I say one more thing, Keith? Just 15 seconds. So we are really, really interested in working with people from learning sciences, learning technology, cognitive science, HCI. There are lots of experts in this room. You have an idea you want to work with us, tell us about it. We want to talk with you. You want to run an experiment, use our class as the infrastructure. We'll work with you so that your experiment runs well. Okay. So we are really, really interested in collaboration. We'll open it up.